Welcome to episode 5 of Part of the System. In the first 4 episodes, we've had guests from a peak body, disability, leisure provider, and industry consultant. This week, it's great to have an authority on the promotion of physical activity representing public health. Today, I'm with Dr. Lindsey Reece, who is the Senior Research Fellow and Director managing the Sprinter Research Team, working in partnership across the University of Sydney and the Office of Sport New South Wales Government. Some of the projects that Lindsey's been working on is evaluating the Active Kids government-led universal voucher programme before moving to Australia. Lindsey worked at Sheffield Hallam University for about 10 years in a variety of roles focusing on obesity, physical activity and public health. Lindsey's also worked for the NHS, the National Health Service in England, as an activity lead for 4 years in the service delivery and evaluation of physical activity, weight management services, reducing obesity in deprived areas. And just because Lindsey's got a bit more time on her hands, she's also volunteers on a number of roles on boards and committees. And some of these include the Executive Committee and Co-Chair Advocacy Committee for ASPA, which is the Australasian Society of Physical Activity. She's a research lead and global research board member of Park Run Australia. Also on the Outdoor New South Wales board as a board member, a research advisory board member for the Veteran Sports Australia, and chair participation panel on Athletics New South Wales. Now that's quite a mouthful. I've talked to some high achievers in my time, but that's quite a list of accolades there. So I'm really excited to chat with Dr. Lindsey Reece. Welcome, Lindsey. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. You're such a star this year. It's very nice. Thank you so much for having me on as well.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you today. So we'll just jump straight into it, Lindsey. In terms of well-being, what does that mean to you?
Such an interesting question, and I'll actually reflect on this on my walk into work this morning. I think for me, it's about, I guess, that sense of feeling content and relaxed. It's when I kind of have that ability to switch off from the everyday, or that ability to kind of switch off from everything that I feel makes me feel stressed. And whether that's the numerous emails you get in your inbox, or whatever it might be day to day. So I think for me, it's that ability of the mind and body of just feeling calm and relaxed and switching off from every day, which I have to admit is not something I find easy to do. So I probably need to prioritise my own well-being a bit more. That's how I would probably personally describe it.
Yeah, and what are some of the strategies you use to give yourself that kind of disconnect?
I think it's definitely that sense of escaping for me. So physical activity is really critical. I have to kind of get outside and move every day, whether that's a walk or a run. And I think now more than ever, I realise that it's definitely more for my mental or emotional state. I think before I was always driven by the physical motivations.
Yeah.
Whereas I think really recently I've noticed that I just need, especially working remotely or different places, you realise I just need to get outside. Then being outside with nature is a key part. But definitely physical activity, walking and running is definitely my kind of go-to. Obviously when we can travel, I'd love a holiday, but for the time being is walking and running, I think.
Yeah, and in terms of that exercise then, walking and running, is that the physical activity that you do? Are them your type of hobbies, or do you do any other sports?
They're my main ones. I've always ran, or running's probably a bit strong. It's probably a bit of a shuffle these days. It's just kind of putting one foot in front of the other and I see what happens. Sometimes it's a walk, sometimes it's a jog. But yeah, that for me, I just find it really relaxing. It's the time where just that feeling again out of breath really strangely makes you feel relaxed. I have tried to do some yoga. I did get involved in one of the apps when we first started working from home. I'm not as good as making the time. I think for me, it is that getting out of the house is the key part.
Yeah.
So I'd love to say I'm into yoga, but I don't find that as easy to build in personally.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Definitely just getting out in the environment and outside makes a big difference. And are you meeting the physical activity rate of 125 minutes a week?
I definitely, I think I am, yeah, I am. Some days are better than others.
Yeah,
I have to say, like everybody, we all find it hard. Things crop up. I'm definitely better if I get the 150, I definitely better do it on a morning. If I
yeah,
get up and get it done, then I feel like other things can't get in the way. Sometimes if I think, oh, I'll go for a run after work, I
yeah.
find then other work things get into place, and then for me, I get too hungry and it's tea time and I don't go. But I think at the minute, yeah, I'm nailing it. I think I'm going to be positive on that one. I'm doing it.
That's it. Leading by example. Excellent.
I'm
So,
trying anyway.
so with Sprinter, then, yeah, bit of a mouthful in terms of all the different groups involved in that. But can you tell me about the role of Sprinter within the health and wellness system, please?
Yeah, of course. So the acronym, so academics love acronyms, and actually Sprinter was one that really stuck.
Yeah,
To start with, it did take me a little bit of time getting used to it because it's kind of the opposite of what we're trying to do. So I think when you hear Sprinter, you think elite athlete and you think kind of 100-meter track and field type thing. What it essentially means is the sport and physical activity intervention and epidemiology research group, which is a mouthful, hence why we say Sprinter. But Sprinter is essentially set up as a policy-focused partnership. So it's between the University of Sydney and the Office of Sport in New South Wales Government. And what really excited me when I was creating it was a true partnership. So it wasn't policymakers commissioning researchers to do a certain project or a programme. It was actually to develop a several-year partnership where they could work together to look at generating the evidence around what we need to do to enable people to move, and those questions are driven by the sector, by government, by practitioners, but then it's also the critical piece around translating that evidence into practice, which so critically is for me, I think, the nugget, because we essentially now know more evidence than ever that physical activity and well-being is a really good thing, and we know we all really need to do it. But actually how you embed that into everyday life and how you embed that in policy and practice really is the nugget. And that's what kind of enables Sprinter to kind of happen. So at its core for me, everything that we do in Sprinter is around enabling people to move. And that's really at its heart. And then what we're trying to do is enable people to be physically active through sport and physical activity. I actually spend, to give some kind of practical aspect of it, I actually spend, in typical before COVID hit, several days a week in the policy department and then several days at uni. So you really are having those day-to-day conversations around what we mean. But for me, it's bridging that gap between the evidence generation and then also translating that into policy and practice. And it's been going now for about 4 years. And we've had some really positive stories from it, and some nice examples where it's worked obviously is the Her Sport Her Way Women in Sport strategy. That's a really nice example where we actually did some evidence reviews around what works to engage women and girls in physical activity in sport, what health and wellbeing benefits are associated when they are active through sport, and then actually if we're going to develop a policy, what do we need in place in order to help those people and help those communities and help the sector to meet those needs. And then now several years on we have the Her Sport Her Way strategy. So that's a really nice example where we were involved right from the outset, building the evidence and then generating the policy.
Yeah, and that whole of systems approach to put together the strategy. How are we how are you going in terms of that? The I suppose the wheels hitting the road and actually making it happen. Is that have you got any information on how are you going there?
So the Her Sport Her Way strategy has been going now for a couple of years, and I think it's technically going to in its year 2. But I think for me, what that's a nice story of is the policy development phase. The implementation now is obviously affected with everything with COVID, but what we learned through that process was that there isn't one set organisation, there's not one set stakeholder, and what it really showed for us, it was the process of engaging all the stakeholders from the start, and that was where the Senior Officer of Sport did a brilliant job, and Kerry Turner is really the kind of focal woman that leads this piece, who embodies it 100% and is just an absolute superstar. But what she managed to do about uniting people around that shared goal about putting women and girls at the heart, and then developing the policy around 4 key pillars, and leveraging investment and thinking broadly. It's a very different government policy than we've seen before. So for me, that process of developing it right from the start was really key, so that now when we're in the implementation phase, everyone's kind of bought into it. We kind of understand what our role is. We all understand what we're aspiring to longer term. And yes, now COVID is an example where we've had to kind of change and navigate as we go along. But yeah, that's a really nice example. There are others which I'm sure you'll ask me about, but I think that's a really nice example of how, for me, the role of evidence and academia can really be there within that process, and that's something that I think is quite unique to Sprinter and what we have here.
Yeah, and just to distill that, I think that work in the beginning is so important between all the different organisations, isn't it? And then, like you said, once you're on the journey, everybody understands what you're all about, and you can all kind of work towards your objectives. And you just mentioned there some of the other projects that you work on. So Active Kids, massive, government-led universal voucher program. And I did see a couple of weeks ago, one of your colleagues did a recent journal article on who did the voucher program reach. So, have you got any of the wins from that research piece? And, is there anything there that you would do differently next time?
So I knew you were going to answer that one because I couldn't do a podcast that talked about active kids. I can't do anything without talking about active kids.
Yeah.
So for people that aren't familiar, Active Kids is a universal voucher program for children and physical activity. So this is a part of the system that's looking at children's physical activity. It's looking at reducing the barrier of cost, as that's the most frequently cited barrier by families around enabling kids to access sporting opportunities. It started in 2018. It's for every child in New South Wales, so the sheer size of it is unique in itself. So that's everyone from 4.5 to 18. And Sprinter, again, we're involved in right from the start around designing the evaluation. So with that, we lead the evaluation for the couple of years. And technically the programme doesn't end until next year, so it's still kind of ongoing, so we're still learning. But I think one thing we've seen from embedding that evaluation from the outset was the ability to integrate a standardised evaluation system, which sounds really dry, but actually enabling us to build in some core metrics about how we're going to measure success for this programme was really key, because you managed to get that in right from the start, so it's now consistent. So each year we have the same data coming through, which doesn't sound like rocket science, but traditionally in sport, that's something that hasn't really happened. So just, a lot of people say to me, well, what can a voucher scheme do? Well, actually, the sheer size and scale of a voucher scheme in New South Wales, I genuinely believe, has enabled us to unite people around a shared goal. What we were interested in from a research perspective is who's going to access the voucher scheme. So the first question is the reach, which obviously I'll come on to in a second. And the second thing is what are the outcomes associated once they have a voucher. So what do they actually go and do? And that's really the juicy stuff. And that's where we've built in some health and wellbeing data from the outset, which is really quite key. But the paper you're referring to is really exciting, because that was actually, so Bridget Foley led that. Bridget Foley's in my Sprinter team. It was actually the first publication for her PhD. She's doing a PhD on active kids. That's brilliant. So everyone that's done a PhD out there will recognise that milestone. Yeah. And what she looked at was 2018 data. So we had in 2018 over 670,000 kids get a voucher, which is just huge. And what we started to look at was who's more likely to get a voucher. And from that, we saw that the older adolescents, so 15 to 17, people that lived in disadvantaged communities, and girls were less likely to register for a voucher in the first place. So straight away, one of the key learnings is around, although we have this universal program, we still need to target on the communities that need help to be active. It also showed that 70% of kids that registered for a voucher were participating in some form of physical activity before they got a voucher. But because we looked at the number of kids that achieved physical activity guidelines, only 19% of kids that got a voucher were achieving the 60 active minutes a day. Now, that's quite a crude threshold for kids, so it's like an hour a day. Yeah. But only 19% were. So it says that it's almost, we're reaching kids that are playing some sort of physical activity or sport, but they're still not meeting the guidelines to achieve the health and wellbeing benefits. So what we started to see from the voucher scheme was, before, I guess it's more than ever, we're learning more about the behaviours of children and young people through the programme because of its sheer size and scale. But it is amazing to see that in the first year, the programme achieved such statewide spread. But although it's reaching a lot of people, we still need to focus on tackling some of the inequalities, which we know exist in participation.
Yeah. And how long will the scheme go for?
It was funded as a 4-year programme, so it's funded until next year. So in the first year you can access 1 voucher, and since then you can have 2 vouchers. So our evaluation is running up until next year. And there's lots of other papers. If you go onto the Office of Sport website, we've got some other publications from there as well. But I think for me, as we start to move, we're now in the 3rd phase of the programme. One thing we can really start to look at is what are, from enabling people to play sport, what are some of the health and wellbeing benefits coming through? And I think that will be really critical moving forward.
Yeah, fantastic. Well done to Bridget and your whole team there. Is there, just the last question on that, is there, you talk about 19% there of the, the children that we're reaching, only meeting the activity guidelines. Have you got any targets that you guys want to reach through the Active Kids vouchers, or is it just about the research and better understanding it?
So I guess from my kind of research perspective, we haven't got any targets. One thing I would say is it's been phenomenal, the number of people that have agreed to participate in the research. So I always take the opportunity to say thank you, because it really is phenomenal. And that's how we recruit. When you sign up for a voucher, we say, would you like to be part of the research? So the willingness from New South Wales to be involved in research has been phenomenal. So thank you to everybody. So we don't really have any targets, I guess, from not to put words in the officer sports mouth, but I know for them, they want to reach as many kids as possible.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that we obviously want to be able to do is to encourage as many children as we can to reach the physical activity guidelines, or look at playing more sport. I think for me, I would like us to look at the inequalities in participation a little more, look at some targeted work with some of the communities that we know are less likely to be active. And I think if we can start to focus on that from a research perspective, that's where there are some gaps in the evidence. I think that's where we could really start to use the Active Kids programme as a real nugget to kind of share some of those learnings and insights, which would help tackle some of the kind of long-term ingrained challenges. So that's kind of my own kind of research perspective, because I'm most interested in helping people that are currently inactive and how we kind of support them into activity. And the programme is showing it's reaching them. So if you flip that 19% on its head, it shows you're actually reaching people that aren't just your traditional sporty people. You are reaching people that are overweight and obese. We know we are reaching, the statewide representation. So that's exciting. What I want to do now is learn more about how we can work to support them to continue that activity.
Yeah, and listening to you there, what's springing to mind is the proportionate universalism, which is just a really fancy word for, I think, providing for the people that need it most. But I think if we do tackle those people from disadvantaged communities, we can get our biggest bang for our buck, in trying to increase those physical activity levels.
Definitely. But in some ways, that's where I guess the moral and you can talk about Active Kids all day, couldn't we? But I think one of the exciting things about it is that, yes, off the face of it, you would say it challenges the public health, traditional public health approach is saying, well, universal, that means everybody. And it is one of the first in the world to ever do a universal approach. But the fact that it is, by its sheer scale, actually reaching all parts of society, that's really great. Yeah. What we now need to do, now we've got that huge kind of reach, which is what the paper shows, is now work on the targeting. But 100%, yeah. And I think I've probably been turned a little bit in the sense that the sheer size and scale is I guess convinced me that we are still reaching people that need it, which was obviously one of my kind of initial public health concerns at the start.
Yeah, well, keep doing what you're doing in terms of Active Kids, and just taking it a little bit broader, and onto my next question. It's around the Getting Australia Active, so the GAA3. Which I think is an absolutely brilliant document, all 273 pages of it. I think I'm still making my way through it, but obviously you were involved in co-authoring that with a whole bunch of researchers and academics, and it's a real, I think it's a fantastic roadmap in terms of what we all need to be looking at, through a systems approach, not just focusing on policymakers, but, practitioners, etc. But in terms of, and this is going to be hard to kind of distill it down into one thing, but if we were to collectively, use the document, and I'm talking about everybody, how can we try and get more people more active using the document, or, what do you see the role of that document?
I think the first thing I would say is, yes, it is long. There are some evidence summaries that are online, but I really think the first thing I would encourage everyone to do is get their favourite cup of tea, get a coffee, and give yourself permission to have the headspace to read it. And it's very rare, I'm going to say that for a lot of the academic work, but it really is a wealth of knowledge that are led by some of the best in terms of this side of the world for physical activity policy and systems. And the reason I say give yourself permission to do it is that whole systems really is, in some ways, a buzzword that we hear all the time. And the reason I say give yourself permission to absorb and digest it is that the value in a systems approach is understanding the process. It's not just about looking at the fancy colourful map at the end and going, great, this is the solution. I've got a nice spaghetti map. I can go out and I know what to do. Yeah. It's actually not about that. It's about working and understanding the programme. all the components of the system, sorry, and it's about understanding the links between them. And that's the golden nugget in whole systems. It's around mapping who the key players are, or the key actors. It's then about understanding all the factors that are there in place, and then it's understanding the relationships between them. Now, what the Get in Australia Active 3 resource does is it's the first time we've tried to map the system for Australia. So you've got the World Health Organization's Global Action Plan for Physical Activity, which started to map the system at a global level. They've set the target for reducing physical inactivity by 15% by 2030. All the governments are signed up to it, and you've got your pillars in that. So that's a great document to start with. GAA3 then starts to look at it from the Australian perspective. So that essentially they've done a lot of the work for you. So that's why I kind of say use this resource to really start to get your head around what we mean by whole systems. What does it mean in Australian context? Because that's what the GAA3 does. It also starts to look at all the different surveillance and measurement systems. There's a whole great chapter there that Adrian Bowman led on measuring physical activity, defining physical activity, and the measures that are in place. That's like the first half, before you even jump into the 8 chapters. And then you jump into the really juicy stuff, which are the 8 leverage points of the system, which is based off the best investments for physical activity. And then you can jump into each chapter. So I know it's a very long-winded answer to your question, but I think it's really giving yourself the time to absorb and digest the content, because there's so much in there. That will save you time in the long run, I think. Focus on the 8 key chapters have got summaries. The 8 chapters really give you an insight in terms of the best bang for your buck. So what's going to shift the population dial for physical activity, and you can probably prioritise those based on where you are in the system. So, if you work in sport, you might want to prioritise that one. If you work within mass media, you might want to prioritise that one. But it's also based as well on a huge wealth of research that we conducted from the national meetings. We looked at a desk review. So a lot of the work's been done. So I would take the time, give yourself permission to digest it, focus on the areas that are probably interest to you. And then at the end, I would start thinking about I always ask everyone then to think about what's your role, what context are you operating in? And sometimes it's not then you have to map your whole system yourself. It's about then maybe understanding what role you can play in that system, because it can be a little bit overwhelming. And that's where I say taking the time out to give yourself some headspace and a cup of tea to digest is probably key. I'm not sure if actually I've answered your question.
You have. And all I would add to that is I'd encourage anybody to just to start making their way through it. And it's a big document, but there's lots of gold in there. And for somebody that's working in the industry as a practitioner, and there's a lot of relevant information in there. So I can't get enough of it.
There is, and I would really say it's there. It's there as your go-to guide. It's meant to be a how-to guide. It's meant to be, if you want, some areas of solutions, or you want the evidence to help put in front of a government policymaker, or to put in front of someone that you're really trying to convince to give you money, or if you're putting it in front of your manager to why you should be doing this particular piece of work, you can use this to add evidence to your argument. So I'd use it as your go-to guide to inform your own work. You can also use it as a real business case to help drive, well, this is why we should be doing it. It's not just me saying this as an individual or as a practitioner, this is me saying it from a whole body of work and a whole body of evidence. It is predominantly Australia focused as well, so you've also got that in a local context. But I'd also reach out to the authors. All of us are honestly, we're really lovely. They're all on social media. They're all there. So once if you're reading it, tweet one of the authors. Tracy's on there, Bill, Adrian. They're all on social media. Bombard them with your questions.
Yeah, well, it's worked because I'm speaking to you. So,
That's true.
No, thanks for that. And just moving on to ASPA. So for those listening, ASPA is the Australasian Society of Physical Activity. It's really exciting to read a little bit about what ASPA is all about. But in terms of, if you could just explain a bit about ASPA and the vision, I suppose, and how that fits in with the system as well, Lindsey.
Yeah, of course. So this is still fairly new. So my role is I sit on the executive committee for it. Essentially, it's meant to be it's a professional society to help unite practitioners, policymakers, and scientists and academics, all working in physical activity across Australia, New Zealand, and Southeast Asia. And I guess it really is the society is meant to be a forum to enable those professions to come together. They were seeing that there was a bit of a disconnect between this part of the world in terms of how we have those conversations in a consistent way, how we bring people to share learning, share what we're doing in this particular part of the world, and that was the reason why it was set up. I guess the vision is to accelerate the learning and knowledge and integration of physical activity in all the different sectors, whether that's health, education, and really the ultimate goal is to enable people to move, and it's about how we can provide the forum to do that. I guess some of the key goals, which I've actually, I did make a few notes on to make sure I got them right. I've mentioned the kind of forum. I think the other aspect is to help build capacity. A lot of the work that we do in Sprint is around building capability and capacity across the system to deliver physical activity interventions and programs and policies and evidence. ASPA really is there to do that. It's also around accelerating the dissemination. So particularly for the academic community, it provides a forum for us to share the evidence. Because I think one thing I've learned through Sprinter is it's not easy for academics to get into the policy space or practice. And it's actually it's quite a unique skill to communicate research findings. And then if you're on the other side of the fence, policymakers are like, it's a minefield knowing what the evidence is. Where do I go for just the top nuggets? Where do I go for the key stories from different papers and stuff? So I think that's what the society is there to do. It's still in its infancy, so it's still, I would encourage everyone to have a look on the website, have a little look and sign up, be a member. I think there might be some discounted rates, so feel free to go on. But I think it's there to be a one-stop shop for physical activity, to help you in your day job advocate for physical activity, but essentially bring people together to talk and share learning.
Yeah, awesome. And I think it was coming through the GAA document around building capacity, and I think ASPA's going to help do that. So fantastic. We're running out. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, running out of time. I talk too much, don't I?
No, it's all good. Carry on.
I was just going to say that the capability and capacity piece is something that I'm personally really interested in, and I guess it's a theme that comes across a lot of my work, because we can generate as much evidence as we can on whole systems, and you can produce documents and policies, but they're only as good as if we know how to use them and how people can use them and how it helps. So I guess it's a bit of a call to action for us all in terms of how we communicate what we're doing, but it's also about how we foster those conversations. And I think ASPA's really trying to do that, and so is GAA3. But I think if any listeners, are thinking about, well, this would be really helpful to me, or this is the support I need, then feel free to reach out and share that, because I think that's what we're all trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of chronic conditions, so I know the work of the Australian Preventative Centre does a lot on this around systems, and the GEA document's got some best practice stuff on obesity and from Public Health England. But if we could look to nudge the system in for the better, in terms of reducing chronic conditions for the well-being of Australians, what do you think we could? What is it that we could do?
Oh, tough question. I mean, as obviously with the whole systems, there's not kind of one single answer.
Yeah.
I definitely would be very biased to say that physical activity really is one of the best things we can all do for our health and well-being.
Yeah.
At times it might not feel like it in an individual level, but we know that it has such a role in the prevention, management and treatment of chronic disease. And when I used to work back in the NHS, that was predominantly my role. It was delivering physical activity interventions for people with chronic disease. And sometimes when you're being diagnosed with a chronic condition, it is hard. The last thing on your priority list is to be active, or even to really be kind to yourself and give yourself self-care, really. But physical activity for me, and I'll be very biased, but that for me would be at the heart of it. And I think all the things that we've talked about today and all the different influences that affect people's physical activity at different time points in their lives, if we can work to constantly adapt and understand the system throughout, then I think that will really help prevent, manage and treat chronic disease.
Yeah, them intersection points are interesting around the physical activity. Like, even when you go to work, like what are employers doing? The transport and there's obviously a lot that can impact. But physical activity, I think we just need to keep flying that flag. And my last question is really about you and where you see yourself in the system. And you're obviously doing a lot of work with the roles that you play, whether you're on boards or the work with ASPA or Sprinter. But yeah, where do you see yourself, Lindsey, in terms of you in the system?
Crikey, that's a tough question, isn't it?
Sorry, am I asking the tough ones?
You're finishing on a tough one. It's probably a critical one there. I probably should have a better answer. Where do I see myself in the system? I guess all I try and do is try and help people genuinely, whether that's individuals in the community, whether that's policymakers, academics. I think I genuinely have an innate belief that physical activity is beneficial for people, whether that's health, well-being, economically, the whole works. So everything I do is around helping people to move genuinely, or helping other people to help other people to move. Where I see myself in the system, I'm probably in a more professional answer, I'm probably quite fluid. So I don't necessarily see myself fully in academia. I don't see myself fully in the policy space. I probably am finding myself more in this advocating space. So a lot of what I do is around championing and the art of physical activity. So whether it's about the evidence for why we need it, it's around providing support for policymakers to do it. To quote somebody that's a close friend, they call themselves a pro-academic. So it's basically like a bit of a practitioner, a bit of a policymaker, a bit of an advocate. It's basically a bit of a jack of all trades. So I kind of probably see myself fluid in the system, doing a bit of the evidence, doing a bit of the policy making, doing a bit of the advocating. I'm not sure if I've answered your question.
We're working across the whole system, and I think that advocacy is really, really important. So you look at how we've reduced, tobacco and smoking and all that stuff. But I think advocacy is definitely something we could learn from the tobacco industries and stuff.
100%. And that's probably where just recently in the last 12 months I've found myself more in the advocacy space, with a couple of board roles I've been on, and that's maybe where I'm looking forward. That's probably where I'll find myself more in the system if I was to be reflective, because and I think that's probably based on generating the evidence and trying to translate it. You kind of see it from both sides, but ultimately what we need to be able to do is advocate at different levels. And I think a lot of the attention goes on the political advocacy, but when you look at the different forms of advocacy, there's community mobilisation, there's working with professional organisations, and I think it really is trying to raise the profile and the importance of the physical activity conversation. And it's also around enabling everyone else to be academics, whether that's sending an email from an important document to just a colleague. That's advocacy, and everybody can be having those physical activity conversations no matter where you are in the system. And I think it's giving people the confidence and empowering people that you can actually be a champion too. And I think probably that's where I'll be working a bit more in the advocacy space with physical activity probably in the next 12 months.
Yeah, and I think that's a really nice way to end, in terms of we've all got the opportunity and ability to influence the system, and through advocacy and capacity building, which is at the heart of what a systems approach is all about. So, in terms of today, have you got any questions or anything that you want to add at the end?
I don't think so. I mean, I would ask you a question.
Sure.
Are you managing? How do you like to get yourself active? And are you meeting the 115 minutes a week?
Straight back at me.
I'm turning those tables.
Yeah, I love it. I'm really lucky to live next to a park in Sydney, Centennial Park. So I'm pretty rigid with my routine, and I feel like if I can give to myself on the morning and get out there and go for a walk or go for a run, then it just sets me up for the whole day. I did the double yesterday. I actually went for 2 walks, one at the morning, one at the end of the day. And obviously, I'm very lucky to be able to do that. But I think getting it in is just so important. It makes me feel so much better.
It really does, doesn't it? It's sometimes we put so many barriers. It can be so hard to build it in. But then actually, when we do it, we know we always feel better. So
yeah, absolutely. Okay, Dr. Lindsey Reece, thank you so much for your time. I've loved speaking to you, and I've been looking forward to this for a while. I just want to wish you all the best for the rest of the year. Acknowledge you for all the work that you do. Really respect, everything that you're doing and continue to do. So, just like to, thank you very much, and talk to you soon.
That's very kind. Thank you so much. Lovely to talk to you.
See you, Lindsey.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.